So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I suppose before I get started, so thanks to Linux Recruit. I've known Tony for years, if I'm honest, like a scarily large amount of time now. And I genuinely mean this. I've always been impressed by how well you guys have done. So I think it's a great thing that you do, Dr. Lunn. In all honesty, to the presenters before, well done on a live demo, because they're always entertaining, and I thought we went really well. And in the longer term, if we should do this at the Amazon thing. So before we get started, I suppose, so who am I? So Jon Hammant. So I lead the compute business for AWS for United Kingdom. So that's everything from our containers, Spot. We do loads of stuff in HPC that people don't always know about, some of which is secretive and some of which we can talk about. But all of our EC2 and effectively just the compute business. So it's quite a sizable thing. Prior to this, I've been doing DevOps for probably since way before it was called DevOps. And I suppose what we're just going to go through today is something that we don't often talk about that much, which is the story of Amazon and how we went through our own DevOps transformation, and kind of what we've learned and what's good about the whole thing. Before we get started, if this stuff looks interesting to you, because genuinely it's really cool the way we work as a company. We are genuinely different from anywhere else I've ever worked previously, in a very good way. We have lots of jobs at the moment, so I could not recommend people enough. Take a look at Amazon jobs. We've got some specific ones that we're looking to fill in, the head of solution architecture for the UK, container specialists all around Europe, all kinds of interesting jobs sitting around. So please, take a look. If you've got any questions at all, feel free to hit me up directly via email or LinkedIn or one of the many communication methods we have. Cool. So I suppose what we're just going to go through quickly today, and it's probably a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it's something that's interesting, really is how Amazon got started, what we've done as a company and what we've learned from the things that went well in terms of DevOps, in terms of development processes, how we base our development, how we build building blocks of modern applications, some examples and a couple of stats, which I think some of which are pretty impressive. There might be a little bit of time for Q&A. I'm guessing that's just going to go through the chat box. Cool. So what we're going to do is go through the story, the not a whiteboard edition, because I like doing it. We'll go through this, of how we got started and what we've done. And before we go into this, I'm sure we've all seen various definitions of what DevOps is, and I love this Venn diagram approach that it comes around. But I think one of the key things for me is it's the combination of practices, and that's one of the key things that we've done. We've tried to join together different people from different sides of the business, and primarily the thing that we've optimized for is velocity. So So for me, before working for Amazon, I was probably an avid Amazon shopper. It genuinely amazed me during the pandemic how many things used to pop up at my door on a regular basis. And I think what's fantastic as a company is just how seamless that is. But when you kind of look at it, it's a huge, complex machine. It really is. It has size, it has scope, it has everything from HIPAA data to loads of credit card information. It is a very complex, large organization. And we, from an early point, thought that actually some of the concepts around DevOps were really key to us. And personally, as much as I like the kind of what is DevOps, the best way I think it sums up is what our CTO said around all of this. And that's you build it, you run it. And everything we do around this is kind of based off that as a principle. And I think one of the things I'll go into in a bit is how we set up our teams. And all of this is trying to take what at the moment I think is now in a 1 million person plus organization and treat it like lots and lots of startups, because there is a huge change that's coming around the whole of the industry at the moment that is moving people. So whether you're in Boston Consulting Group who are starting up lots of little startups, or whether you're in a large organization, so one of the big FS organizations that's splitting themselves up, I think what's really starting to happen is companies are starting to act like these smaller connection startups. So let's go into what are our rules. So we have 3 laws of Amazon DevOps, and these are mine. These aren't necessarily official, so other people may tell you slightly different pieces around it. The first thing for us is we break things down. So effectively, looking at how Amazon fits together, you could see it as a large monolithic piece. But for us, what we've really focused on is how to break those things down to the smallest components we can have. It's as a company, it's run extremely differently from a lot of other places. I mean, I've worked all across the industry previously, both on a consulting things. I got to see loads of different companies, how they function, and client side at various FS organizations. And I think the best way I can almost sum it up is most organizations they're kind of like being in the military. And actually, if you look at organizational design, a lot of it is based off the Second World War. So, if you think about companies that you work in, or that you've seen before, most large companies almost have field marshals and they have generals, and they go down in this big pyramid structure. The way that we do things differently is we act far more almost like an animal or an organism. So we have different broken down areas that almost act as those cells within the body of the animal. And the thing that we do that I think is very clever is we manage to hold all of those things together. So the key thing is you break things down into small businesses, with small functions, sorry. And each of those teams work as an autonomous business. So, if I look at the way that my group works, for example, I have real, genuine ownership and autonomy over the compute business for the UK. And then we have other groups that we work with who have their own ownership. And that's everything. And this runs across both the development side of things. Every area of Amazon you can imagine is using this same piece. And you might think, how do you do this? How do you do this at scale when you have such complex things? And the way that we do it is we automate everything. I think automation overall is probably one of the kind of the worst, almost dirty secrets of tech. So, I remember from years back in my career of talking to CIOs and CTOs and hearing them like bang fists on the table and saying what you need to do is you need to automate stuff. I think most places I've seen lack that kind of automation substrate. I think it's a real lacking issue across IT. And that's something we've put real effort in. We try and automate everything we can do. And I think something I talk to people, if you're going through this DevOps transformation, you're looking at all of it, just try and automate something like once a week, automate those processes, and that's really what we've done over time to get to the situation where we can release at scale and do all kinds of fun stuff. And I suppose I kind of lied. There's not quite three laws. There's one more thing that I think is key, and that's just managing the things that matter. I think people spend way too much time on worrying about things and dealing with things that fundamentally don't either add value to your business or don't add value to your customers. We pride ourselves around a concept of leadership principles. So we have 14 leadership principles that are key, and it's quite different from other companies. It's that culture that holds the business together. We make sure that we're only managing the things that really matter around that. So let's take a look back into kind of how we started out, because as you may know, the history of Amazon, we initially sold books. Jeff moved over, started what was going to be the world's largest bookseller. And if we look at the original architecture that sat around it was the same as everyone else's. It was relatively monolithic. It was user, internet, web server. Effectively the simplistic three-tiered web application that most people know and have loved and have used for years. But that gives loads of bottlenecks, as you would imagine. There's loads of challenges, there's loads of pieces around that are hard. So we started to scale this. So this is back, if you think our initial designs are kind of back in the late 90s. And in 1998, the Distributed Computing Manifesto, as crazy as that sounds, came out. And we started to realize, actually, the way to do this is we start to break things into components. And that definitely helped. But there was still a very, very long way to go. And if you look at this, for an example, you have problems with it. As much as you have separate web DBs, you have separate other databases, there's still these hard pulls between it that mean that you can only release at a certain rate. It holds businesses back, and it was something that we realized we needed to change. So we started changing it, because the first step to any journey that people go through is the first one. And how did we do that? So we started with principles and culture is a really important thing to any of this. As you're going through this change, your teams go through this, make sure you write down those tenets, make sure that there's an understanding of This is what you should do, and so we do it. And one of the principles we had is we make things as small as possible, turn them into primitives. And in each of those primitives, we get to a point where we have separate data domains. So you may not realize it, or you may realize it, but as you go through the Amazon website, effectively, you have very, very componentized data domains. And this is something that's, I think, important for a lot of different industries. One of the bits of feedback that we'd often hear when I was running DevOps for GSI was that we can't do DevOps, we can't do these things because we have credit card details, or we have important data around people. The whole way that we manage this is we've split up that data into being as small as possible. Then you decouple based on those scaling factors. Get to a point of make sure that stuff is separated in a way that needs to scale. So work out where you're scaling factors. Don't think about the functions, think about the scaling. And I love this quote from Jeff. Communication is terrible. So it's really difficult to communicate well. And that's not just in terms of your technical side of things. That's in terms of your communication, in terms of teams. We work really, really heavily on what underpins all of this, which is APIs. Everything is a set API that can communicate with, and that's the same for an organizational design as well. So we have almost preset APIs and expectations in the way that we work with other teams. You might have heard we've got what we like to refer to as our peculiar ways of working, and it's things like the working backwards process. So we'll look at things from a customer perspective, we'll work back to what we have to do. Or when we report, so one of the things that I like the most about joining the firm, and I think it comes down to how we change this, is you have to write a plan, because it's a really sensible thing. And I've worked for so many different companies where you just kind of do stuff, and you have lots of teams doing stuff, but there's not really a plan of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And one of the things that I was very, very keen on is the fact that we write a plan and we execute against it. And the thing that we noticed when we're starting this all out, this really led to changes in the organization. And it's interesting. Conway's Law is a fantastic thing where you have changes in the way that you organize teams, changes the way that you deliver software. And we almost found this in Invest. The way that we were looking at delivering software meant that we needed to change the way that we delivered our teams. And looking at what happened in the transformation, it wasn't quick. It took a long time. So if we roll back to 2001, we had large monolithic applications and large monolithic teams, effectively. And the big change that we've done over the years, over the 8 years, roughly, that it took to get to this point, and by no means was it done within those 8 years. There's so many things that happened afterwards, so many different bits of tech. One of the key things that we did was breaking down services into microservices and this concept of two pizza teams. And I think two pizza teams is a really interesting point, because one of the questions with microservices that people often have is, how big do you build the service? Like, what is a microservice? And I've worked with organizations where they almost go to this point of having macro services, which gets cut across. The scaling factor that we use for our application development and how we separate stuff up is, what can a two pizza team do? And the definition for us for a two pizza team is roughly a team effectively that can be fed by roughly two large pizzas. So depending on how hungry you are, that ends up being somewhere between about 10 to 12 people or so. And we really believe this. This is across the whole organization. And these two pizza teams, they have autonomy, they can make their own decisions, and they're responsible for what they do. And that's a really key thing. So how do we do this? So how do we do it through innovation? And I think this comes in some of the way that we build the company. And all of these are things that we would thoroughly recommend other organizations to effectively learn from or duplicate or do however you want. But we're doing this to a large extent, because I think this is a sensible thing. Through all of this, we've used concepts and mechanisms. So mechanisms for us are just encoded bits of behavior that you can use multiple times and can spread out against your organization. And we contribute that back in. So if you come up with a better process, the idea is you contribute that process back into the whole. Some of the ones that you might have heard of are working backwards. We make sure everything's customer focused. We have a very specific and possibly peculiar interview process where during an interview, you have the concept of something called a bar raiser. So when we interview people, We make sure that F1 we hire is better than 50% of the people currently doing that job. And that's assessed by someone who doesn't work within the team. And that's a really useful thing. All of this comes down to the culture. If you want to change your organization, if you want to do interesting things, change the culture. Hire people that are builders. Let them build. Support people properly. And I think it all sounds relatively obvious, but doing that at scale is relatively challenging, and moving that across is hard. And the way you do it is you have mechanisms that underpin this. We have a set of leadership principles that we do it. But you just make sure that you support people to build and do interesting stuff. And a lot of this comes into the architecture that we've built as an organization. One of the most fun things I found was that on my first day, I had unfettered access to a AWS cloud account with to a large extent no limits, which is pretty cool. As someone who genuinely likes tech, there was something quite cool of going, well, actually, I'm gonna spin up an interestingly large size cluster and do some interesting ML stuff on it. And we try and do that. We support people. And I think for everyone, if you're working in an organization, it doesn't support you properly and it doesn't let you do what you want, then I would definitely think about what you're doing for a career and go and look somewhere. Because there's really interesting companies out there. There's us, there's loads of other folk that do kind of cool stuff. And I think increasingly that's going to have to happen for people, organizations that want to attract and hire and keep the best talent, basically. Organizationally, we have small teams. They own what they create. There's ownership and autonomy, and it's really key that we have people that do this. So, like, now we do our teams. As I said before, 2 pizzas. They own a service. They have minimal social constraints. They have autonomy to do what they decide is correct, so they can release at their own cadence. And it's hard to do this and scale it. And I'll go into some of the things that we've done from a tech perspective that help this. But that concept of ownership and autonomy is absolutely key to the way that we work. And I suppose, what are the teams? What are the teams actually? What do they do? And they own everything. So one of the biggest bugbears that I have in the world of tech sometimes is security. When you have a concept of a completely separate security team, it's just bonkers. It's just absolutely bonkers. You need to put all of this within a team. Trust people, give them the autonomy to make the right decisions. I'm extremely lucky with the autonomy and the decisions that I can make around it. And in turn, the people that work within my teams and with the teams around, we do exactly the same thing. We give people the ability to execute. And you own everything from the performance, the scalability, the deployment, the bugs, the documentation, the testing. And you kind of think to yourself, well, how can one team do all of this? Because it is a lot, and these are small groups of it. And it comes back to one of the pillars we talked about at first, and it's automation. So what you see here effectively is just a high-level view of our development pipeline. It's something we'll come back into it. The key thing that we've really tried to push for is small changes. Going to a point where people, where developers, if you're not as a developer, you're not pushing code every day, then I would question the design decisions around the organization you're looking. You want to encourage small decisions. You want to automate the deployment about it. It should be, I love the concept of what do you do on your first day? You commit to production. Like that's cool from my perspective. And all of this just pulls this speed. We want to find reasons to fail, want to find reasons to roll it back, because it doesn't matter. The less that failure matters, the more that you experiment, and the more that you experiment, the faster you go. And we really, really try to, we encode the pieces around it. So what do we monitor in this? Because you might think, well, these teams are kind of running around. We have lots of metrics. We have lots of metrics around the business. So things like growth, usage. We fix it around the operational metrics. So if ever you've seen the Amazon error page, those metrics have gone back somewhere. And that will have either called rollback of the deployments, or it will have called alerting. But we monitor those things pretty closely. I think it's really interesting, and I'll go into it in a second, but the way that we roll things out, the idea is that it's designed for scale and it's designed for failure. We have inputs around features, performances, and things like documentation, operational training. All of this is key to the product. It's key to these small pieces we've done. And personally, we don't do this in a complete vacuum. We use all kinds of different tooling. There is this as I'm sure everyone's aware, there's a very, very strong ecosystem, and it's something that we use ourselves. We use all combination of things, and I think we're very, very lucky of the strength of the DevOps ecosystem that I think, it is testament to the people on this call and the people within the industry of how much this has been built. And what's this done? So we have probably thousands, we have tens of thousands of service teams across Amazon. They all build microservices. We all go for continuous delivery. Continuous deployment is just not good enough. You need to go into continuous delivery. And back in 2014, we were doing 150,000 deployments per day. And that is a crazy perspective when you compare it to where some of the more legacy organizations sit. And from my perspective, everyone's going to get here. It's just a matter of time. And I think people quite honestly don't want to turn into the next Woolworths. People are very aware that the only way to move forward is to do this quickly and get this big. So just while I've got a little bit of time, let's take a bit of a look into what our pipeline actually looks like. So effectively, our pipeline split up into three key bits: development, mid-stage, and production. Development, most of our developers work on Amazon Cloud 9. We give them cloud IDEs because they work really well. It gets people up. It means you don't have to worry about it. And we use Amazon Code Commit as our Git repository. The idea being that you work on the smallest possible thing you can. We do code reviews, and code reviews are something that everyone participates. I think it's a really useful thing to understand the culture, to really understand to work out what you do. We explicitly define our dependencies, and we make sure that we have testing. We test within what you're doing. And the whole idea of this is designed for speed. So your development stage within a pipeline should be fast. It should spin because it enables developers to iterate, and it enables them to check in and push to production multiple times a day. And the quicker you can push things to production, the less that gap is, effectively, the more benefit you can get out of it. Then if we look into the mid-stage of our pipeline, it should be thorough. So it should be something it's taking the dependencies, it bundles things into a combined architect. I think one of my favorite things in the way that DevOps has changed is, if you remember, there was an early 90s TV programming, or probably early 80s actually now, early 80s children's TV program called Big Bertha, and it had this kind of giant room-sized machine where stuff went through. And as weird as it sounds, I think modern IT systems are relatively like that. And for me, it's one of the key changes we've had through different kinds of packaging, through containers, through Kubernetes, so all of this stuff is the ability to ball things up into singular pieces that can run through. And so for us, our mid-stage is very, very thorough. And then finally, things push into production. So in production, we've got a number of different environments we run through. We only promote on success. We look to fail. So, all of this goes through a beta environment initially. We're very lucky because of the work that underpins AWS, because of the things that we can do. We can dynamically spin up and scale and shut back down. And I think if I look at why I think we're going into this golden age of tech, I think it's a combination of people are becoming more trained. People understand this, the processes they go through. Tech is turning into this Lego block approach that's fantastically powerful. Go through a gamut, we go through integration testing, and then we go into production. Start small, we deploy waves into effectively what we bake. So they go into each way. We look for it to fail, and we gradually expand that out. And here we have an example pipeline architecture. And, going back to the fact that we treat everyone as individual businesses, not everyone will use this. And that's fine. A lot of this, we base it off templates. So it's very, very, very easy to spin up an architecture that looks like this. And that comes from effectively the Cloud 9 all the way through to canary testing within the different fleets as they bake. But we try and do all of this by having preset templates, preset ways to do it. And this is what realistically for us, a journey that's now coming into 20 years in terms of moving the teams over, automating the architecture, our usage and growing a cloud, which to a large extent was done for our own usage initially at first, has ended up in this. And if you're interested in this, we put a load of stuff out. So we put a load of workshops and ways to understand it that you can go out and use. I would thoroughly recommend looking at our Blue-Green Deployment DevOps workshop. It's really good. It's really thorough. Takes a few hours, spin stuff up, do interesting stuff, all good. We've published a lot of our DevOps Essential stuff on GitHub as well. So again, I'd really recommend taking a look at that. And yeah, for anyone looking at doing this, depending where you are in your career, depending whether you're interested or in deep or wherever you are, just pick a project, pick something that interests you. Go onto Reddit self-hosted, pick some kind of software. And this is how I do it. Pick something that's interesting, build it, run it through that production life cycle of, pulling out, whether it's a home photo sharing thing, do something that's an interesting product you can take and roll it through the same DevOps process of getting that pipeline. And if you can do that, if you're not doing that in your job, that's how to learn all of this. And that's it from me. So thank you very much for the time. I'm hoping that wasn't about roughly what I should have been. And yeah, any questions, please ping them into the box. You're absolutely more than welcome to either ping me on LinkedIn or ask. We're genuinely here to help. And please take a look at Amazon.jobs. And thank you very much, Liz. It's been very good to present.